Good evening, everyone. I'm Regina Shearer, and I'm your host for the Winning Women Talk Show. And we are so happy that you have found time in your day to join us once again. And once again, we try to present a different woman sharing a different walk of life and a different career path, a different passion for a different thing. And we hope that it's been making a difference in your lives. We are always looking for ways to motivate and inspire our viewers and our listeners with the stories and the journeys of these awesome, amazing women. And no, they're not the celebrities that you can easily see on television. They're not the entertainers and all the those people that you will see in the magazines featured everywhere, but they are featured in many ways in everyday lives of all of us by what they do and how they're recognized for what they do. And yes, these are the women that you could be standing in line at the food market with and never know that that person that's making you mad because you've been waiting in line so long is doing some incredible things that if you knew it, you'd be very glad to wait for her. And so we are inviting you, as always, to share in this journey with us tonight. And you can do that by calling in if you have your pen and pencils ready or if you are using your digital device. We want to hear from you. And the number to call in is 781 384 5587. And I will show that to you on the screen. 781 384 5587, or you can email us, and that's Regina at rgbinternetradio.com. Again, Regina at rgbinternetradio.com. I am looking forward to hearing from you and receiving your emails. And I know our guest tonight is also. And our guest is Lori Nelson. She is the senior advisor to Mayor Michelle Wu of Boston. And she is the senior advisor of equity and inclusion on racial justice. And Lori has been working with community leaders and many organizations to acknowledge the past and remove systemic barriers in order to create racial equity in Boston. Her political portfolio includes outreach to Black, Indigenous people, and other people of color. We call it BIPOC. Com- all of these communities for, and she has done this for former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick, Suffolk County District Attorney Rachel Rollins, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, U.S. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, and Boston City Councilors Andrea Campbell and Kim Janey. So, yes, she's worked with all those famous names that you've seen on television and heard about in the news. Her involvement in civic engagement has included being in the Boston chapter of the NAACP, the Black Ministerial Alliance of Greater Boston, the board of directors for the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts, as the chair of strategic planning, and as a special advisor to the Emerge USA Young Leaders Cabinet. Lori's senior leadership roles in the city and state government include the Boston Housing Authority, deputy chief of staff for the Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority, Deputy Director of Community Affairs and Special Projects for Governor Deval Patrick. Her education includes studies in English literature, African American studies, and urban politics at Northeastern University. There's much, much more to this lady than you will ever know. But right now, we're going to let her tell that story. So, welcome, Lori, to the Winning Women Talk Show.
Thank you so much, Regina. Thank you for having me. It is always it's always good to be in a space where you feel safe, where you feel valued, where you feel appreciated, and where you are heard. And so I want to applaud you for this wonderful show and what you do for so many. So I am glad to be here. I get a little, whenever I hear people read stuff about me, I get a little funny. But but thank you for that wonderful intro. I will just add, I'm very blessed to be the mother of a wonderful young man. My son Malachi is 17, and he's a senior at BC High, and I'm just very proud to be um, his mom. And I am also very proud to be the daughter of a civil rights leader here in Boston, and my mom, Charlotte Nelson, who has served in many different spaces relative to the NAACP and her work with civil rights, with social justice. She and my dad, the late Leon T. Nelson, really helped to carve out what you read and how I try to do this work today. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you for this show and for reaching many people, many voices, and many women throughout the Commonwealth. Thank you so much.
Well, again, thank you. And for someone saying, I think I've heard that voice before, or that name sounds familiar. Didn't I hear? Yes, absolutely.
Mm.
Lori was with us a couple of months ago, and we had some technical difficulties that we were unable to get the video that we wanted. So I I asked her if she would be willing to come back. She didn't hesitate to say yes, and we've fixed those issues, and there she is, and you will see this video tonight and any time in the near future. But Lori, I have to say, you started telling us about your mother and your father and the influence they had on you and their um, engagement in civil rights initiatives. So we know that piece about you. So are you a Boston? Tell us about, are you Boston born and bred? And tell us a little bit about you, that a little more about that influence and exactly, is that what they were primarily engaged in? Did they have other careers? You told us about your son, but are you an only child? And let us hear about you.
Sure. Born and raised in Boston, proud
And we
Boston.
can hear you, so you don't have to hold your
Okay, good, good, good. As long as y'all can hear me, that's good.
yeah, we
Okay.
can.
Born and bred in Boston. I am a proud resident of the Dorchester area of Boston. My earlier years, my mom and dad, my dad was the founder of an organization called the Greater Roxbury Chamber of Commerce. Right before I entered high school, I used to live in Brookline. So we started our journey in Brookline, and then we came here to where I currently reside. Um, some 30 plus years ago, because my dad wanted to start his own business, and the business was going to focus on Black economic empowerment. And so the
Mm,
Greater Roxbury Chamber of Commerce was founded and did a number of things, was the curator and designer of the 100 Black Influential listing, did a number of events empowering Black businesses and Black entrepreneurship, and began to convene biannual conferences focused on economic development and empowerment. Um, and he also served in different leadership roles with institutions that were very essential, and I believe remain essential, are pillars in our community. So he did work with Freedom House. He did work with the Federal Reserve Bank, serving as one of the first African Americans in a senior leadership role there.
mhm.
So the story goes that he was also very much involved with the NAACP Boston chapter. Uh, this is where he met my mom. My mom, a native of Florida, travels up here right out of high school because her aunt was sick. My aunt, my late godmother, lived in Bridgewater, Mass. So my mom comes from Florida up to Brockton at the time to begin to take care of my aunt.
Okay.
As a result, she begins to volunteer work with the NAACP under the leadership of the late Kenneth Guscott. And from there, Mr. Guscott decides to do a matchmaking event and has my mom and dad meet, and the rest is history. So they did a lot of work. That's how they started their journey of civil rights and social justice. Fast forward to me. Um, I went to Northeastern University, graduated with a Bachelor's of Arts in English Literature. You read some of the other parts of the work and what I did in college. It was also there that I began this journey of Black thought, Black experience, Black leadership, really in a different level because I was the editor in chief of the Onyx newspaper, the Black newspaper for Northeastern University. It was
Okay.
from there I began my trajectory of really being involved with community. Loved to do volunteer work. Had always, it was inevitable that I would be a part of the NAACP, so I served with Youth and College Division and also did some consulting work with the National Organization for the Youth and College Division. After that, um, very interesting. I took a shift when I graduated from Northeastern. I took a shift into communications. Very awkward, right? I was
Yeah.
tapped. I was tapped. I was tapped at the time by um, a young lady who was like a mentor to me. And she said, you know what? You've always been able to meet people where they are. You have this knack for speaking to people and getting them, very excited about things. I want you to consider working for at the time WILD. So I
Oh,
began my journey with WILD under Dr. Bernadine Nash and was there for the merger of ILD when it became Radio One.
yeah.
And I did major lifestyle accounts. And so I dealt with the major artists and their launches of new albums or their tours. Did a lot of work with Russ Parr and Tom Joyner. So we leave there because she was like a family friend, but became my aunt. Was the current at the time executive director of the Black Caucus, enter politics, and she was getting ready to shift, wanted to do something a little different, and she said, "I want you to consider this role." And I thought it was hilarious because I'm like, okay, I'm in communications, I'm in radio. And quite candidly, radio made a lot of money. And so so I didn't know if it was going to be wise to go from radio to public service. Um, but I felt something tugging, and so I started there as the director of the Black Caucus. From there, Governor Patrick knocked on my door, then former candidate Patrick. And I had heard about him. There was all this buzz around this black man who was going to be bold, courageous, and run for governor, right? Regina and I was like, wow, his portfolio was amazing, having served with I think it was Coca Cola, having served with the Clinton administration, having served in these different, just a high profile, very wise, very talented black man. Okay. He knocks on my door at the time when I was at the caucus, and I'll never forget this. He says to me, "So I was told that I have to speak with you if I want to consider a serious run for governor." And I was like, "What? All right, what do you say?" Right? um, and so I met with him, um, began to do a lot of think tank work with him and his team. And we launched the successful and historical campaign. And then I came in actually into his administration on the second term after he won the second election. And that's where I became the deputy, the director of community engagement and
Mhm.
special projects. And so my life has literally been that type of trajectory where I have been blessed and fortunate to work for leaders that always push me to go to the next. And so when he was leaving office, um, he said, "I need you to help this powerful black woman. I need you to help her really understand the landscape. I need you to help her build how transit meets the people where they are." And so I was like, "Gov," because I'm like the loyalist, right? I'm like, "Gov, nah, when you leave," he's like, "Nope." He's like, "And the other thing is, I will not be able to give you the money that you deserve because we're capped, right? I'm the governor's office. You're on my team. But if you go to the MBTA, you can write your own ticket to some extent, right? You can ask for a different salary, the whole nine." And he said, "I promise you, you will not regret working for this powerful woman." Enters Dr. Beverly A. Scott. who had served on international transit and infrastructure boards, had at the time when she comes to Massachusetts, had served as the leader of 5 different transit authorities across the nation. And we had one meeting, and she said, I don't know what it is about you, but I think you have thick skin, and I think you know what you're doing, and I think you'll be great for community. So I had one more final interview because you have to do that, right? That's the standard procedure. And I became the deputy chief of staff rather for the MBTA under the first Black woman to lead that organization. And so it was a wonderful, wonderful time
Wow.
working with someone as gifted as Dr. Scott. And then she launched me into the different ways that I worked with quasi agencies in the city, and then where I am now. So it has been a wonderful journey. And I would dare say that it has been really a journey of purpose. I do believe every place that I've worked, it's not for nothing, if you will. It certainly has a deeper purpose, a deeper calling. And I've always been blessed to serve with and for persons who understand that same moral compass,
Right.
right? And conviction
Right.
relative to public service and how we have to serve our people. At
Hmm.
the end of the day, Regina, the goal is to ensure that all of our people, particularly people of color, and the specific lane that I'm in now, it's really Black people, are able to have access and opportunity like everybody else. And how do we do that, right? Do it
Hmm.
through policies, programs, and practices that actually meet the people where they are. Speak to the many voices that make up our rich and very diverse community,
Hmm.
and then ensuring that those policies are actually manifested, right? And that allows for people to either uh, be placed at tables that are already built, or they have the tools necessary to build their own chairs and build their own tables, right? And
Right.
and really be able to move forward with however they believe they are supposed to live and thrive in the city of Boston. So that's been my journey.
Right. But okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't live in Massachusetts, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm very familiar with a lot that goes on there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the names of the people that Deval Patrick, Rachel Rollins, Ayanna Pressley, Elizabeth Warren, Andrea Campbell, these people are people whose names are in the news, whose names are mentioned in various venues
Mm-hmm.
that don't just have, first, through politics, right? Because of their political professions, but also when we're talking about racial justice and yet that racial justice piece wasn't there. When did it become part of the Office of Equity and Inclusion? Was this when
So
you came on board?
so here's what happens. It's an interesting thing. So I believe, well, let me put it like this. Let me say this right. When I came into the city, now 7 years ago, I'm still in shock. It's been 7 years. Wow. I came under then former Mayor Martin Walsh.
Hmm.
And Mayor Walsh at the time had a unique opportunity with the city of Boston to apply for a grant that was activated by the Rockefeller Foundation. And it was to look at how cities are looking at and beginning to build strategies around resilience. City of Boston, under the first ever Chief Resilience Officer of the city, Dr. Atia Martin, one of my sister leader friends, was very clear that she wanted to challenge the city of Boston and its history, to look at resilience not as how people look at resilience via climate. Most people look at resilience and it's like, okay, climate and certainly necessary, like floods and heat deserts and the like. She wanted to look at it from the lens of race. That is to say, how has Boston uh, contended with race matters
Hmm.
and issues of racial injustice. And so this playbook, if you will, which became the Boston Resilience Strategy, is how I become part of the work of racial justice. And Dr. Tia began to think of the fact that she wanted to have her own consulting company. And as she exited the city of Boston, I got a call from the mayor at that time, and he asked me to join and be the second ever chief resilience officer for the city of Boston. And so racial justice, albeit I could argue from the time I started working in politics, certainly was at the core, right? If I go back to the legislative caucus, a lot of our agendas were based on the needs of Black people, right? So when we build these political agendas or legislative platforms for the year, that was always at the core. When it became very much at the forefront was under Mayor Walsh. But then when COVID hits, right? COVID certainly was a pandemic of health, but also a pandemic that lifted up the very realities of race matters, right? And so there's a pandemic of health and wellness where certainly we saw disparities in how Black and Brown communities were at once we understood what this was, right? How Black and Brown communities were not receiving the same access to vaccines, were not coming quick enough, where we had health centers who were behind as we were trying to combat this disease.
Right.
Same time, we see the very brutal and untimely killing of George Floyd. So, pandemic of health and the pandemic of race. And at that time, uh, the city of Boston declared race as a public health crisis. I want to submit that might have been 2021. Yes,
Hmm.
2020.
Hmm.
And as a result, racial justice gets totally put into the forefront of how we do this work.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you
Yes.
for that history,
Mm-hmm.
because I I when you say resilience, race matters is definitely part of
Mm-hmm.
resilience, right? And so when you're talking about public health, and when you're talking about the, the toll that the pandemic took on BIPOC
Yes.
communities, you're absolutely right. And resilience is at the heart
Mm-hmm.
of trying to get these things worked out, straightened out, right? Moved out, or whatever it takes, so that there's equity in going for those vaccines.
That's right.
There's equity in being told the truth about the vaccines, and not listening to. I heard so many myths about what these vaccines were going to do to people. All I kept saying is, somebody thinks tomorrow they're going to wake up and have green hair, and all of these crazy things that equity was communicating clearly
Mm-hmm.
what this is all about. and
Mm-hmm.
and I appreciate that you were involved with that, because I my field of ministry, we were vital to a lot of public health departments to be able to communicate clearly to people of color that you're not going to die if you
That's right. That's right.
you know and so I thank you already for being part of that, because the one thing that was frustrating me at the beginning of the pandemic was how few
Yeah.
people of color were getting vaccinated once the vaccine was out there, and how very few of them really understood the vaccine and
Mm-hmm.
how it works. So thank you. And so y- I just have to ask this. Did you play a role in strategies for voting? Because I know that over the last two major terms, there was a different response from people of color getting to polls.
Yeah.
Not
Yes.
only for, the municipal elections or state elections, but
Hmm.
also for the national
Hmm.
offices. So,
So I will tell you, great question. Thank you for that. Couple of things. Uh, I've had this. It's a unique space to be in, right? Because you get called upon by either persons who are considering running for office and or persons who are in office and are trying to continue to ensure that our people actually show up and vote, right, exercising their rights. This also stems from the place that I started with when I shared with you the NAACP and the NAACP and the Black Ministerial Alliance. Both institutions have always tried to ensure that we are doing what is the just and right thing to do, and that is to get out the vote. And so, particularly in 2024, uh, the presidential election, it was critical that between the churches in the Commonwealth and some of our leaders who were very clear on targeted campaigns and how to ensure that persons who might have had, um, the voter fatigue. I mean, the reality is we're in a constant election cycle, whether it's your local, state or federal, there's always something happening. And so people were getting a little weary. That's just the truth. People, numbers suggest that we, black and brown people, usually do our highest number of voter turnout in presidential. And so if you're not in a presidential year, your numbers might look different, right? And so it was very intentional to remind people of why the down ballot matters, right? Like
yes.
it's not just about, and hear me, each office, we respect each office. But there is something to be said about voting in your locals, right? Pardon me, excuse me. There's something to be said about making sure you vote for your city council or however you do based on your town or where you live,
Hmm.
whether you have aldermen or however you do it, but to show up, right, and to be counted. Something very strategic to also be said of why it matters, right? And so in the last two election cycles, recognizing that there was this possibility of things shifting. This is now presidential, but also even if you look at the local politics and how people's neighborhoods are shifting, right? The reality is there are many people who look like you and I who have been pushed further out of the city, and so you want to ensure that you're hearing from them, and most of that comes from voting spaces because there's questions, there are things that you answer, right? There are things that we need to know that helps us to collect the best data to figure out the strategy that will help to ensure not only that the voices are continued to be heard via voting, but that also in between time, we really work on, again, I go through the policy programming and practice space
Right.
that we are hearing from the people. And so, long answer to say, with the work of the church, and historically the Black church has always been the pillar, bedrock, if you will, of how you do this get out the vote piece, whether it be, certainly when we learned from the movement and even in how some of the larger races that have happened here in the Commonwealth where Black and Brown people were on ballots. Churches mobilized, right? Churches decided that they were going to bring people to the polls. Churches decided that they would, in their own way, educate people on the issues, right, that
Hmm.
matter and impact them. And so I think that has been the combination of how we have tried to ensure that our people still get out to vote, right? That our people still recognize the relevance and the why. The last thing I'll say is that, it's not lost on even generations that are younger than you and I, right? It's if they've done their homework and they've read any part of history, it is not lost that people literally sacrificed for that right,
Yeah.
right? And so part of this is always to remember those spaces where lives were sacrificed, right? Where where people literally, were treated differently and went through different types of verbal and or physical abuse or those
Mm.
things,
Mm-hmm.
so that a Regina and a Lori could actually go to the polls, right?
Right.
And so when you take all of that into account, it is. I believe it's our responsibility. Speaking from a space of a Black church, I come out of the AME church, and so I really am. Very adamant about that being our responsibility, right? That we
Yeah.
continue to ensure that people are educated, informed, and have the access. And access in this case, Regina, could be something as simple as getting people to the polls,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, like
Right.
rides to the polls and the ways that you want to ensure that there's no room for saying that you could not do, right? Or someone could not get to, right? And so
Right.
that's been what we've done. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you who have just joined us, and we are so happy to see you're here with us this evening, and you have been observing and listening to Lori Nelson, and she is the senior advisor in the mayor of Boston's Office of Equity and Inclusion. She's the senior advisor on racial justice, and she's been telling us about the path that she's taken to get there, and she didn't miss one step, I can tell you, but also some of the work that she's had to do under the last two mayors. We're going to hear more about that, but we're going to take a quick break for one of our sponsors and give Lori a chance if she needs a drink of water or something, and also for you to take this number down, 781-384-5587, or email me, Regina, at rgbinternetradio.com, because we want to hear from you. We want to know what you're thinking. If you have any questions for Lori tonight or any comments you'd like to make, we welcome them. So don't go too far. We're going to take 30 seconds for one of our sponsors, and we will be right back. Thank you.
Do you know how many people are harmed by domestic violence every day? Every minute, 20 people are physically abused by an intimate partner. Do you know what the leading cause of homelessness is for women? Domestic violence. Do you know how domestic violence ends? Through your help. If you know someone who needs help from abuse, please call Portal to Hope at 781-338-7678. Portal to Hope is a survivor-driven team seeking to provide shelter, safety, and a pathway to gaining an abuse-free life. Call Portal to Hope at 781-338-7678. We are here to help.
And we are back with our guest tonight, Lori Nelson, who is the senior advisor for racial justice in the office of the mayor of Boston, Michelle Wu. And I'm going to bring up two things that I'd love for you to share with us. One is, since we were talking about some of the ways that race in itself creates a need for justice, and definitely racial justice and equity and access in so many different venues. But the work of racial justice is being challenged, and I'm just curious of what kinds of ways you're looking at working through this, working through these challenges. And then while we're talking about challenges, what for you, because you've talked about what the impact of the pandemic and the public health crisis for people of color, but what for you has been in it, probably it might have been one of your first, it could have been in the middle, but what has been one of the biggest challenges you've encountered in your work in racial justice?
So, I'm probably gonna work backwards.
Okay.
Let me start with the challenge right now, and I think you and I touched on this a little bit. This is a very unusual time, right, in government and in the nation. And if we look at the trajectory uh, of racial justice and or equity and inclusion and how it catapults to the forefront, it is at a crisis moment, right? So again, COVID of two proportions, COVID of health and a COVID of race. COVID of health as in COVID-19, and the disparities that lied within rather communities of color,
Mhm.
whether it be not getting the same access or not having the same type of quick response. But then a COVID of and or a pandemic that really put in the forefront some of the isms that we have tried to combat and continue to combat relative to uh, brutality and how black men and black women, but black men are treated with police and police reforms.
Mm.
So it is at that time where there was this guilt factor, right? If we just walk this out, right? And all of a sudden there was this emphasis from our allies and those who felt some way, shape, or form that they had contributed to these harms. Everyone wanted to put their best foot forward, whether it be financially, whether it be by way of creating different roles and pathways, whether it be to the extent even creating new offices and or initiatives focused on racial justice. It came to this heightened space, right? And everybody was intentional about what they wanted to do in that space.
Mhm.
We fast forward to where we are now. And right now in 2025, it is literally erasure, right? It is literally how these things that were built up, these things that came out of crisis that actually put racial justice in the forefront are now systemically and strategically being stripped, right? And so the challenge becomes, how does this remain at the forefront or center of people's minds? Because we certainly could argue that we have not achieved the goals, even from those who came before us, right? The shoulders that we stand on to achieve the goals of true racial justice and equity. That is where, again, my analogy is always where everyone gets to eat at a table
Yes.
and or have the tools and the resources, right, to be able to build their own tables and to actually create and cook their own feast, right?
Yes.
And so because we are not there, and because, well, let me put it like this, there are some who are there. We are all not there. And because these isms that we continue to combat daily are now very much in our face again, the challenge becomes, how do we, number one, recognize that some of us have actually been able to move forward in this trajectory, and some are not really trying to lift as we climb, and that's the honest to God truth.
Mhm.
There are, the reality of, again, at one point, racial justice was the hot topic. That is,
Yes.
you could go into every room, any corner of whatever type of office and or business or whatever the case may be, and you were welcomed with open arms. And not only were you welcomed with open arms, people wanted to truly hear and try to build, right, and create how we combat this thing, this ism that we know has existed in our history for 400 plus years. Okay. Now, those doors are closed. Mhm.
Yes.
And so the question becomes, how do we continue to shine the light on the isms that still exist while looking at different modes of creativity, of innovation, and of resource to ensure that they are not erased. So it's a combo of being extremely innovative and really leaning on how we come out of a people who have created everything, right? We come out of a people who there was no shortage of supply or resource, and it was not. Um, it was not ever, there was never lack. Whether the lack came from understanding what it meant to use the tools or your hands or whatever it is before you, and or the combination of collaborative and collective type of work that allowed for us to build together, right? And
Hmm.
so where we are now is really an analysis of what that is, right?
Yes.
And how we could do this in times where it might actually become costly to do this, right?
Yes.
And so again, I think I started off by talking about my mom. My mom was in the movement, and her fear has been the way we're going backward, right? The way that with some of the things that are happening that are very real time, like every day it's something new, right? That we are going backward to the movement versus
Yes.
advancing. And so, we have to lean on how they built it and what some of those blueprints are,
Hmm.
and really dust those off, if you will, and combine that with the reality of today in this moment.
Yes.
And again, going back to being extremely innovative and extremely creative, and depending on your belief or not. For me, there's a huge component of faith, right? And so how do we lean into our faith to help and guide and
Yes.
navigate us through these times? So that's the challenge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm,
But that, but that's a major challenge.
mm-hmm,
That's not anything to take lightly. So your work is cut out for you. I
mm-hmm,
have a email that I wanted to. We have a few, but I wanted to bring this one up because
mm-hmm,
I'm so enthralled with everything you're saying, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, has that much time gone by?
mm-hmm.
It says, "Good evening, Lori. It's been a pleasure listening to you so far. You've given us history lessons and also some thought provoking statements. Are you doing work with housing advocacy for Black people so that they are not so easily driven out of their neighborhoods? I know that's a broad question, but there are so many particulars that drive reasons for this."
Sure. Thank you for the question. I am part of a cabinet called the Equity and Inclusion Cabinet in the city of Boston. And there are 8 departments therein that focus on historically marginalized and or targeted populations. But within that, there are 2 departments that deal with uh, human rights and fair housing. So we have a fair housing department currently led by the interim director, a gentleman named Dwayne Watts. And he really has put together a blueprint of that exact question. How do we ensure that we are looking at housing that is fair, that is equitable, right? Housing that um, allows people to not only survive but also thrive. Housing that really meets the current needs of people, people who look like us,
Hmm.
and those type of opportunities through housing that certainly are ones that again are equitable, right? Ones that actually meet the need. And so there is a plan called the affordably, I always mess it up, fair housing plan. And he is the one of the architects of that plan. And I would suggest that for anyone who wants to know about the work of the cabinet, you can go to boston.gov /equity and inclusion, or you can just look on the boston.gov website, and the equity and inclusion cabinet will come up. And
Okay.
under there, you'll see the departments and you'll see the initiatives and the work. And again, for fair housing. And thank you for that question. Because certainly we look at the history of Black and Brown people and gentrification and how we have been moved out and further out from the city. And I assure you that there are persons within City Hall who are very committed to not only ensuring that that history is not repeated, but to make sure that people are educated, informed, and have
Right.
access to tools that can help them really think about where they live and how they will live, and then certainly to thrive in those spaces.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for responding to that. Um, I asked you about the greatest challenge that you've had, and I know that in a way that's not fair because the work you do is all challenging.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
What I am curious about, though, and mind you, I am not trying to set you up to put yourself in jeopardy for
Sure.
any reason,
Mm-hmm,
but I'm not talking about any individual. I'm talking about a nation right now.
mm-hmm,
There are lots of challenges in this nation that are impacting the educational systems. When you talk about systemic, our educational systems from elementary all the way through post secondary
mm-hmm,
are being challenged because of the lack of concern of preserving history of people of color
mm-hmm.
in this nation. And also because um, some people think it's okay to have a revisionist point of view of
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And I just wonder, in your work,
Mm-hmm.
are you getting constant communications from educators or
Mm-hmm.
about this, or is it a done deal that we're part of a school system, this is what they say, and this is what we have to do? What's the current reality for you when it comes to this type of thing?
So I will tell you, it's interesting, and again, thank you for that. Um, so I was recently at a polling site. We just had our preliminary elections, as you well know, and
Hmm.
I'm going somewhere with this. And it was people were talking about erasure of history in schools. People were like, who's going to teach our children? Who's going to teach our babies? And so, what was very clear was that there were a group of people at one of the polling sites, and they started reflecting on the freedom schools.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that took people, I mean, the conversations were so rich, Regina. I mean, people were outside of, I had to monitor a couple of polling stations in my ward. And at each one, it was incredible. People were talking about, what would it look like to have schools that were totally dedicated to us again, right? What would it look like to have institutions that were very focused on ensuring that our babies understood our history, like, our deep roots, our why, right, and our contributions, right, to a nation. So I say that to say that those conversations, even prior to a preliminary election cycle, have been in the works, whether it be through some of our philanthropic partners who have thought about, do we reinsert the concept just to kind of tease it up of teachings, right? So teaching is not, of course, the um, you know um, teachings are certainly not, your freedom schools per se, right? But teachings certainly get people in rooms to begin to really dive in, right,
Hmm.
into this history of who we are and why we are and what we've done, right? And so that conversation, I promise you, has been stirring up really for around 3 or 4 years. I will say that in the beginning stages of another one of our partners is Embrace Boston. And in the beginning stages of Embrace,
Hmm.
they actually did teachings that were focused on the legacy and life of the Kings and their work here in the city of, in Boston. And so those teachings were very successful. Many different walks of life, many different allies and partners. But the core certainly was about the movement and Black and Brown experience. I only say that to say that I do think there's something very unique about this time, where whether it be a combo of the teaching methodology and or thinking, or the actual revisiting of the freedom schools, may be a pathway that people are considering. Last thing I'll say, my third partner, again, I've mentioned them before, is the Museum of African American History. And I promise you that in some of the conversations I've had with Dr. Trent, who is the CEO, the revisiting of that actual institution and space
Mm-hmm.
with the A. Bill Smith School, which was one of the first schools that housed Black children, to educate them, has come up several times. Like,
Yeah.
how do we consider what this looks like? I will tell you, under Mayor Wu and our administration currently, we did a pilot program. I think it was last school year. It's 2025, last school year, where we were looking at 10 schools that were offering AP African American history courses on purpose, right? Because the goal is to ensure that we are not erased. And so that pilot was very successful. So we're hopeful to expand it even under these circumstances. But
Right.
um, to answer your question short, it's been a conversation, and there have been conversations, rather, whether it be the teaching method and how does community, if Regina in her community, there may be 30 to 40 persons who come together consistently, and the conversation stems around either our timeline of history as a people, or our timeline relative to this current reality, or even recent history, or combo, or just understanding our history. So it's that. And again, I will always lean into the church on purpose,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And to the extent that
Yep.
Black and brown church have been pivotal in even that space, right, of educating
That's
and
right.
informing. And
That's
how do
right.
we re-engage them to perhaps consider this larger picture of a maybe a different version of a freedom school, like a freedom school 2.0. But it would really look at those institutions and pillars that understand how vital it is, right, that we
Mhm.
are not erased. But that would be my response. That certainly conversations have happened. I would be foolish not to suggest that there's some perhaps philanthropic partners who are actually trying to map some things out. But I will tell you that that has been conversation.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to know that it was anticipated um, e- e- early
Mm-hmm.
that those conversations need to take place. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. My mind went exactly straight to the church, because coming up, that's where I learned how to publicly speak,
That's
to
right.
to
That's right.
recite,
That's right.
memorize, and all those things. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but nevertheless, so we know that you've got many items on your table. So, what is your goal for 2026 in your work? Is there anything in particular, or does all of what is happening right now kind of shift what your goals are, because you have to deal with resilience and
Mm-hmm.
survival?
So I will share with you two things. We are currently what I would call the 3.0 version of a racial justice policy agenda. And the
Mhm.
only reason why I say 3.0, because we've had to take into consideration the fact that we are a city that is not back down. We are not shrinking to some of the ways that the nation is trying to pivot.
Yes.
And as such, we have to look at a racial justice policy agenda that also does not shrink down, but is very clear about the moment. So my ultimate goal would be that this current framing that we have put together, that certainly still incorporates some of the things that we have talked about tonight, Regina, right? So
Mhm.
housing is in it,
Yes.
voter rights and voter access is in it,
Hmm.
right? Health and wellness is in it, right? And of course education is in it, and economic development, economic opportunity, economic empowerment, right?
Yes.
So those core pillars that really come from the movement, I mean the pillars have not really shifted, right,
Hmm.
are part of this 3.0
Okay.
way that we're looking at a racial justice framing that would really embed our lens. That is the Black and Brown experience, Black and Brown voice, Black and Brown being and culture into how we continue to govern, right? And
Right.
that is the North Star, right? That's the end goal. And of course, you have to look at a resource as a part of that equation, right? So it's policy, program, practice, and then it's resource. And so, how do we ensure that this policy agenda has attached to it, real deliverables by way of budgets and dollars and cents that would allow us to try to continue to move the work forward and to put resources where resources are needed,
Right.
right? So that's it.
Right.
Um, you said, what would be my one goal? Certainly, under the portfolio of work, we are looking at the work of reparations. Reparations is part of the work that we do, and so we are currently in a phase one, going into phase two of a study by two research teams that would look at the impact of the city of Boston and slavery,
Mhm.
starting from 18-ish, is it 1865 through present day. There are there are 6 units of study, and 5 units are conducted and being researched by a team out of Tufts University. And the second unit of study, or the last rather, is done by Northeastern University. And
Mm.
so we are anticipating those reports to be reviewed and to really pull out there not only the harms that have happened, but then certainly from a place of being bold and courageous and taking on the task of acknowledging the
Right.
harm of reparations, how the city of Boston will now
Right.
wrestle and attempt to repair those harms. And so those are the two spaces that
Yeah.
hopefully by 2026 we will have a real, I call it a playbook. I always do playbooks, right? Like there will be a sound foundation
Yeah.
of how we move forward.
Wow. Well, I can say this. So you've got more on your plate.
Mm-hmm.
You've
Mm-hmm.
got more on your plate, but you used the phrase bold and courageous. And I would say, Lori, that that's why you have traveled through all these different venues of dealing with equity, inclusion, and now racial justice because you're bold and
Thank you.
you are courageous, and the work you do, you have to be, and be a visionary versus
Mm-hmm.
a revisionist. And you are a visionary in your work, and we want to wish you much success in all that you do, and thank you for what you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
and your engagement in so many important groups and organizations that I know will serve to support the initiatives and things that you will work out for the city, as well as work with them to
Mm-hmm.
bring into fruition. And so I thank you again. I'm glad we didn't have any technical difficulties
Yeah.
this time
Mhm.
around. And I can't thank you enough. I hope that we will connect some way, somehow
Yes.
in the near future because we know people in common. But I think you mentioned um, Mrs. Martin's. And I remember her only as Dr. Martin, like
Mhm.
Tia Martin, right?
Yes,
But
yes.
I think you picked up a mantle. I think that partnership and that mentoring that you received, even if she was just a role model, it's in you. And so thank you for using it for some great
Mm,
leaders in our political world, great leaders of color. You still are under a mayor of color.
mhm.
And so we wish you nothing but the best. You truly are a winning woman. And thanks for revisiting us on this show.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And please know I consider you a partner, and we are in this together. Thank you.
Okay. So for all of you who were with us tonight, thank you for staying with us. Same time, same